Around 8 months ago, I completely switched up my opening repertoire, most notably swapping out my beloved Caro Khan for the Sicilian Defense and my London system for the Catalan. In doing so, I've truly understood the value of knowing multiple openings. Not only are you much more unpredictable to play against, but openings often transpose into one another, which can help you find familiarity in otherwise tricky positions. But I wasn't satisfied with just learning a couple of openings, so welcome to my series where I study an opening so you don't have to. Today we'll be looking at the Ruy Lopez. We'll be going through all of the necessary lines, and at the end, I'll give a rating based on 3 main categories. Those categories are effectiveness, entertainment value, and theoretical difficulty. If you'd like to get a better understanding of how I studied the opening, check out the video at the top of the description where I walk through my opening study plan. Also, make sure to leave a comment on what opening I should study. Whichever comment has the most likes will be the opening that we study in the next video. Before we do start the video though, if you guys do enjoy my content and want to help support the channel, feel free to book a coaching lesson on my new website. You guys can get tailored coaching specialized for your own playstyle, with new students getting 25% off their first lesson using code FIRST at checkout. But with that being said, let's look at one of the most dangerous openings in all of chess, the Ruy Lopez. Let's quickly cover exactly how we can start playing the Ruy Lopez by expanding the board to fill the screen and looking at some moves. The Ruy Lopez begins with e4, e5, followed by knight f3 and knight c6. Various openings branch off from this common chess position, but in the case of the Ruy Lopez, we want to play bishop b5. At just move 3, black already has several ways to challenge our opening. Let's look at the most common one first. The Ruy Lopez Morphy Defense. The Morphy Defense in the Ruy Lopez will feature in the majority of your games if you plan on using the opening. In fact, 72% of Ruy Lopez games fall under this bracket. After bishop b5, black will play a6, kicking our bishop away, asking us if we'll take their knight or drop our bishop back. Bishop takes c6 is a viable move, and is called the exchange variation. However, it is not the best variation, and I would recommend bishop a4 instead. At this point, the Morphy Defense branches off into a few more individualized variations that we must look at separately. The Ruy Lopez Morphy Defense Caro Variation. First, we'll look at the Caro Variation with b5. This is an objectively bad opening, and white should be very happy if black plays this. In response, we simply play bishop b3. Black cannot chase our bishop with knight a5 in this line because the e5 pawn is hanging. Instead, they play bishop b7, using our light squared bishop as a catalyst to expand their queenside pawns and create space for their own bishop to Fianchetto. However, an important consequence of this decision is that our light squared bishop is suddenly unopposed on its diagonal, staring directly at the f7 pawn. We want to strike in the center with d4. Not only does this take major central control, but it also opens up our dark squared bishop, accommodating knight g5 ideas. There is only one move for black here, and it's e takes d4. In response, we do not recapture the pawn, but quietly castle, knowing that both of our bishops are active, our king is castled, we have good central control, and a strong knight on f3. On the contrary, none of black's kingside pieces are developed, they have poor central control, and no way to castle quickly. If instead of e takes d4, black plays d6, we play knight g5, and we're attacking the f7 pawn twice, forcing knight h6. We follow up with bishop d5, pinning the knight to the bishop and rook. It may not look like much of a position, but black is entirely frozen right now. They can't play bishop e7 because they would blunder queen h5, threatening the f7 pawn, which can now not be responded with g3 as the knight hangs. The top engine move is queen c8, which can be followed by the simple c3, defending the central structure. If knight e7, bishop takes b7, queen takes b7, castles can be played, which results in a great position for white. We can again identify that black's pieces are scrambled and incredibly difficult to play with. If d6 nor d takes e4 are played on move 6 for black, we want to play moves with logic. The threat is either d5 or d takes e5. If a move is played that doesn't defend the e5 pawn, like knight f6, we play d takes e5. If a move is played like queen e7 that does defend the pawn, we play d5, taking central space. Whilst the Caro Variation is not an immediate win, it affords white a sizable advantage and a fluid position to play, whilst black plays on the back foot with no real counterplay. Ruy Lopez Morphy Defense Norwegian Variation. If we go back to move 5 really quickly, there's an extension of the Caro Variation called the Norwegian Variation, where instead of fianchettoing their light squared bishop, black chases ours with knight a5. Similarly to the Caro Variation, this is also a subpar line for black. We want to completely ignore black's threat on our bishop and castle kingside. We're banking on the fact that black will have to move their knight 3 times to capture our bishop, opening up our rook in the process. After knight takes b3, we play a takes b3. We currently still have an attack on the e5 pawn, which black needs to address. If they don't address it, we capture it. If they play queen e7, we play d4, attempting to break open the center whilst the king and queen are there. We can leave these lines here though, as any logical development will keep white advantageous as we're so far ahead on development. d6 is the most solid choice from black though, but again we strike centrally with d4. If e takes d4, we play queen takes d4, and we reach a position where black has no development. If knight f6, we play e5, d takes e5, queen takes e5 check, bishop e7, and rook e1, freezing the black position. If any other move from black, we play knight c3 and continue developing naturally. It's important we pay attention to black's king at all times in these lines, looking for opportunities to play rook e1 and e5, exposing the king early on. It's also important to look for when we can play bishop g5, putting pressure on the black king side. With decent enough play, the black position will fall early in the Norwegian variation. Not a whole lot of theoretical know-how is necessary. Ruy Lopez, Morphy Defense, Arkhangelsk Variation. For the next variation in the Morphy Defense, we go back to move 4 this time, where instead of playing b5, black plays the simple knight f6. This is not yet the Arkhangelsk Variation, but after castles, b5, and bishop b3, black now plays bishop g7 to enter it. This might look very familiar, and that's because it is. The only difference is that black has a knight developed on f6. If it's ever unclear why black would play a move like bishop b7 instead of a move like knight takes e5, it's because rook e1 comes with tempo on the knight whilst the king is stuck centrally, which is something that I'll only mention this once because it comes up a few times in the Ruy Lopez, and is counted the same way each time. After bishop b7 though, we play rook e1 regardless. The rook serves two purposes on e1. Firstly, it defends the e4 pawn, and secondly, it vacates the f1 square for our queen's knight to eventually reach. This is a super interesting routing option in the Ruy Lopez, with the knight aiming to start on b1, travel to d2, f1, g3, and finally f4. In slow closed positions like these, we want to develop our knight like this. However, in more open positions, the knight may wander to c3. Black has two options here. The first is bishop e7, which is called the Trajkovic counterattack. In response, we play c3, looking to expand centrally with d4 and completely capture the center. If black plays d6, we first play a4. If b takes a4, we play bishop takes a4, and we still aim to play d4. The reason this is not good for black is the isolated pawn will become a target. If instead of b takes a4, black castles kingside, we simply play d4 and take control of the center. In a position like this, it's a little difficult to tell you exactly what to do, because most tries from black require individualized responses. As a general rule of thumb, we don't want to play d5 unless black gives us good reason to. We want to work on shuffling our pieces into the game whilst nullifying black. For example, routing the knight to the f4 square is a high priority, and developing the dark square bishop is a high priority. White enjoys a classic Ruy Lopez position here, slowly improving the position until black folds under the pressure. Instead of the Trajkovic counterattack on move 7, black can also play bishop c5, which is a nice try too. The idea is quite predictable and is just knight g4. You could be lazy and play h3 to stop this, but why not be proactive and play c3, meeting knight g4 with d4 and cutting off the bishop's sight of the f2 pawn. Knowing this, black will instead meet c3 with bishop b6, but we still follow up with d4, d6, and a4, closely mirroring the Trajkovic counterattack with the bishop being on b6 instead of e7. After black castles short, we play bishop g5. If h3, bishop h4, and we continue this position with similar themes to those we listed previously, with the knight venturing to f4. Ruy Lopez, Morphy Defense, Modern Steinitz Defense. The modern Steinitz is an improved version of another variation we'll look at later, and after bishop a4 on move 4, black will immediately play d6. This is a super interesting difference because it defends the e5 pawn early and threatens to trade off our bishop with b5 and knight a5. Whilst in previous lines we've accepted this concession, in this line it's resourceful to play c3, which allows us to push for d4 at any time, whilst also burrowing our bishop out of any danger on the light squares. Before we look at the main continuation, let's quickly look at some simple lines black can try. If bishop d7, we play d4. Black shouldn't play b5 in this position because it just kicks us to a preferable diagonal, where the f7 pawn will come under fire and we have knight g5 ideas again. Instead, knight f6 is likely, to which we respond with bishop c2, defending our central pawn. If bishop d7, we importantly play knight bd2 instead of castles. If we castle, e takes d4, c takes d4, and knight b4 forces our bishop off the board, as it cannot defend d3 while staying out of the knight's reach. Knight bd2 opens up the b1 square for the bishop to drop back to if this occurs. After knight bd2, if black castles, we follow suit. There's not much more to look at here, as we follow the Ruy Lopez principles of putting our rook on e1 and working our knight up to the f4 square. So instead of bishop d7 on move 5, what about knight f6? Well, here we sacrifice the pawn with d4, because if knight takes d4, we have d5, b5, and bishop c2. hitting both knights simultaneously. This forces knight takes f2 and black is down a piece. Instead, bishop d7 or b5 will be played, and we've transposed with bishop c2. So with that covered, let's look at the main move in this position, which is f5, an ultra-aggressive pawn break from black that requires precision from white. We want to play e takes f5, bishop takes f5, and castles. If black plays b5, we play bishop b3, bishop d3, rook e1, knight f5, and knight g5 is coming. This is a winning position for white, as black will concede material. If not b5 and black plays a move that doesn't prevent d4, we strike with d4, and blast open the center of the board with black's king in our crosshairs. However, black can play more accurately with bishop d3 immediately, forcing rook e1. Now, after bishop e7, which prevents knight g5, we need to play bishop c2 to free up our pawn break. After bishop takes c2, queen takes c2, and knight f6, we finally break with d4. If e takes d4, we play c takes d4, and we're quite happy playing against black's bad bishop, whilst being ahead on development. However, they can play e4, forcing knight g5, d5, f3, h6, and knight h3. They cannot play e takes f3 because of queen g6 check. So after castles, we play knight d2, e takes f3, and knight takes f3, and continue from this position. We have a very unique arrangement of pieces, but all in all, white will have good attacking chances in this game. The modern Steinitz defense is quite solid for black, and although white will have the better chances, it can be very difficult to break down in the middle game. Ruy Lopez, Morphy Defense, Steinitz Deferred. Now it's time to look at the last variation of the Morphy Defense, which is the Steinitz Deferred. In this variation on move 4, black will develop their knight to f6, meaning they will never make the aggressive f5 pawn break. In response, we just play castles. If b5 is played, it will likely transpose into the Caro, Norwegian, or Arkhangelsk Variation. Importantly in this variation, if knight takes e4 is played, we do not play rook e1, but d4, striking for the center. If e takes d4, we play rook e1, pinning the knight, and after f5, we play knight takes d4, and we're threatening f3. If after d4, black plays b5, we play bishop b3, and black plays d5. However, this transposes into the open Ruy Lopez, which we'll cover later. But to reach the Steinitz Deferred, d6 is played by black. We have reached a position again where black threatens to trade off our bishop, so we need to open up space for our bishop with c3 preparing d4. In saying that, we've actually fully transposed into the modern Steinitz here, only reaching the position in a different move order. So with that being said, we'll wrap up our theoretical venture of the Morphy Defense and look at some other areas of the Ruy Lopez. The open Ruy Lopez. We briefly touched on the open Ruy Lopez, but now let's take a deeper dive into it. It still follows the same move order as the Morphy Defense, but is technically not an extension of it as the positional characteristics differ so drastically. After a6, bishop a4, knight f6, and castles, black will take the pawn on e4 with their knight. As previously mentioned, we play d4 here. Again, if e takes d4, rook e1, f5, and knight takes d4, and we're going to win material with f3 to come here, so black won't play this. The best move for black here is b5, to which we obviously respond with bishop b3. Importantly, black's e5 pawn is under attack right now, and their knight is dangerously on the same file as their king. So if a move is played that doesn't address the issue, we play knight takes d5, winning the pawn for free. If e takes d4, rook e1 will give us a massive advantage after d4 and the brilliant knight c3, which cannot be taken as it would allow bishop takes d5, completely shattering the black position. If bishop e6 instead, we just play knight takes e4. d5 is the top engine move though, giving white the pawn back and ensuring the center stays somewhat locked. Whilst knight takes e5 is viable, I much prefer d takes e5, which immediately threatens bishop takes d5 and forces bishop e6 from black. We respond with bishop e3, preventing d4, followed by bishop e7, c3, castles, and knight bd2. This position isn't anything crazy, but I would definitely prefer white here. After knight takes d2, queen takes d2, our pawn on e5 is a major asset and black's queenside pawns are flimsy. The position is fluid for white, and although black isn't completely starstruck here, we really have nothing to complain about. This b5 line is the most common you'll face in the open Ruy Lopez, and although this seems like a small amount of theory, I actually can't justify making this section of the video any bigger than it is already. The open Ruy is just not very theoretical from what I've found. The best part about it, in my opinion, is that even though the positions might be a little bit dull, you keep all your pieces on the board, so there's plenty of room for creativity. With all this being said, let's look at the closed Ruy Lopez. The closed Ruy Lopez. In all variations stemming from the Morphy Defense, the closed Ruy Lopez accounts for 46% of games played. So if you're going to pay close attention at any point during this video, do it now. The closed Ruy Lopez is one of the more fun variations in my opinion, because almost every piece stays on the board for both sides. After a6 on move 3, we play bishop a4, knight f6, castles, and importantly bishop e7 from black, which enters the closed variation. We want to play rook e1 here to defend our pawn, as now the bishop on e7 shields the king on the central file. The current threat is bishop takes c6 to remove the defender of the weak e5 pawn, so black must respond to this threat in one of two ways. If black plays d6, they're playing something called the Averbakh Variation, which we'll look at later. But b5 is the way to continue the closed Ruy Lopez, so let's look at that. We first play bishop b3, retreating our bishop. Bishop b7 from black transposes into the Trashkovic counterattack, which we've already looked at. So in this position, there are only two possibilities to cover. Castles and d6 are the main moves for black, to which we play c3. d5 is the main move here for black, and it's called the Marshall attack, but considering that's a variation within itself, we'll also look at that later. If knight a5 is played, we play bishop c2, opting not to take the free pawn on e5, which leads to an extremely drawish endgame. From here, we want to play d4 and continue with basic Ruy Lopez plans of rotating our knight to the f4 square. If instead of knight a5, d6 is played, we want to play h3 to nullify black's light squared bishop. But after this, every single move from black can be responded to with d4, and the same plans of rerouting our knight. Although we didn't seem to cover too much theory here, we've brushed past two important variations of the closed Ruy that we should look at now. The closed Ruy Lopez Averbakh Variation. As mentioned previously, the Averbakh variation of the closed Ruy Lopez comes on move 6, where black immediately plays d6. We've established that in most lines, when d6 is played, black plans on playing b5 and knight a5 to trade off our strong bishop. So, we prevent that with c3. If b5 is played by black, we're essentially transposing into the closed Ruy, with the only difference being our bishop drops all the way back to c2 instead of b3. However, in this variation, we have not played h3, allowing bishop g4 to be played at any point. If bishop g4 is played, we want to play d3 to open up the crucial d2 square for our knight to begin rerouting. If black castles short, we play knight bd2, and we have extremely straightforward plans which we've outlined in previous variations. Even though bishop g4 didn't cause us any problems, it's still good to play h3 if black plays a move like short castles on move 7, as it renders the bishop largely useless for black and doesn't give it the option to trade itself off. There's not too much more that's different about the Averbakh variation as opposed to the closed Ruy, so let's quickly look at the Marshall attack. The closed Ruy Lopez Marshall attack. The Marshall attack is a part of the closed Ruy Lopez and is entered on move 8, but we'll go through the whole line. After a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castles, bishop e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, castles, and c3, black must play d5 to enter the Marshall attack. The Marshall attack is quite interesting, because it fully gives up a pawn from the black side after e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes e5, and rook takes e5. I quite like this variation for white, as obviously we're up a pawn, but our game plan to consolidate the position is quite straightforward. If any move that isn't c6, we play d4, taking control of the center whilst defending our loose rook on e5. From there, it should be obvious that all other Ruy Lopez plans go out the window. We're almost playing a London system here, so we should develop the remaining pieces on the back rank. Of course, I should mention this knight on d5 is under attack, so obviously capture it if you can. c6 is the best move for black though, allowing the knight to stand tall in the center of the board whilst threatening to harass the rook on the next move. An extremely important move is to follow, and that is the move d3, which I'll immediately explain just so you're not confused. After bishop d6, rook e1, and queen h4, black now threatens the h2 pawn. We play g3, queen h3, and rook e4 to threaten rook h4. If we played d4, g5 would be a viable move for black, stopping rook h4, because if bishop takes g5, black would have queen f4, forking the loose rook and the loose bishop. For this sole reason, we play d3 to avoid this line. So after d3, bishop d6, rook e1, and something like bishop f5, we play queen f3, bishop g6, bishop takes d5, c takes d5, and bishop f4, consolidating the position. If black plays d4 here, they're going to have an interesting endgame where they're down a pawn, but white's structure is weird and exploitable. Although it's worth mentioning, just because white is up a pawn in this endgame, they will have the better winning chances. If bishop takes f4, queen takes f4, and bishop takes d3, we play knight d2, and suddenly white has no exploitable weaknesses, and black is the one with a big target on d5. The knight-bishop imbalance also works in our favor here. That's essentially all there is to the Marshall attack. Whilst black can avoid these endgames with alternate moves, they'll be shooting themselves in the foot evaluation-wise, and strong play will result in a great position for white. The Ruy Lopez Berlin Defense. The Berlin Defense is played in 20% of Ruy Lopez games, so again, let's pay attention. It comes immediately after bishop b5 when black plays knight f6. There's a few things to note already. Because the bishop is on b5, as opposed to a4 like it is in the Morphy Defense, we can no longer respond to knight f6 with castles. If we do, we trade into the Berlin draw. which follows castles, knight takes e4, d4, knight d6, d takes e5, knight takes b5, a4, knight bd4, knight takes d4, knight takes d4, queen takes d4, d5, e takes d6, and queen takes d6. If that's a confusing line for you, don't worry about it. Just trust the fact that even grandmasters avoid this because the middle game and end game is just too drawish for white. Instead, here, we play d3. Playing the Berlin defense like this with the white pieces makes it the least theoretical line we're going to cover. We're almost playing an Italian game here, with the exception of the bishop being on b5. For example, if black plays bishop c5, you can play c3, bishop takes c6, bishop a4, knight bd2, or castles. There's virtually no difference on evaluation between these moves, so you can kind of just play whatever you like. The best way to describe this variation is, now we play chess, because theory won't give you an edge over your opponent, raw chess skill will. Basically, just play this like you would an Italian game. You can play c3 if you really like and continue a Ruy Lopez, or you can just castle and look to play more conservatively. It's really up to you. I wish I had more guidance for you in this variation, but I don't think it's appropriate for me to be telling you to play a specific line when there are dozens of working ideas for white. So let's move on to the next variation. The Ruy Lopez Schliemann Defense. Although it's uncommon, the Schliemann Defense is quite dangerous and you must know the theory to it or you will be absolutely blown off the board. After bishop b5, black responds with f5, blasting open their own kingside to destabilize the center of the board. The most important thing is that we don't accept this gambited pawn, but instead play d3. If we take the pawn, they'll play e4 and force our knight back to its home square. After d3, black has four main options. Let's first look at f takes e4, to which we respond with d takes e4. This is beneficial for us as our queen is now open, whilst black's king is open. After knight f6, we play castles, knowing if knight takes e4, rook e1 will come with deadly intentions. Black also needs to be careful of their e5 pawn dropping off the board, as at any moment we can play bishop takes c6 to remove the defender. Knowing this, black will play d6, to which we sacrifice the pawn again with bishop c4. If knight takes e4, we come with queen d5 now, forking the knight and checkmate on f7. Again, black will play bishop g4 to prevent this, to which we play h3. If bishop takes f3, white is plus 1.4 after queen takes f3, as black is left without the bishop pair and a bad bishop. They haven't castled and both knights are passive. In this variation, after bishop b7, we want to play c3 to prevent knight d4, but apart from this, white is completely winning positionally. If bishop h4 instead of bishop takes f3 though, we play knight c3. Our light squared bishop means that black can't castle kingside, so they'll play queen d7 to castle long. In response, we play knight d5 and let them castle queenside. We enjoy an advantageous opposite side castling game here where we have much better piece activity, and it's our turn to move. On move 4 though, instead of f takes e4, black can also play knight f6, bishop c5 or d6. In this case, we actually want to play e takes f5 now, as e4 is no longer possible. The problem for black now is that we have the threat of removing the defender of the e5 pawn and holding on to our f5 pawn. d6 covers both of these problems for black, but then we castle short, and if bishop takes d5, we play d4, breaking open the center and punishing black for not getting their king to safety. With this being said, it should be obvious that black not addressing the E and F pawns will lead to great positions for white on move 4. The Ruy Lopez Classical Defense. The classical defense of the Ruy Lopez is quite common at the lower levels for players with the black pieces that don't know theory. After bishop b5, black doesn't respect the opening and blindly develops their bishop to c5. Of course, the classical defense is theoretical, but most who play it would be stumbling into the opening and not have preparation, as it is not a great try from black. The pressure on our f2 pawn from black's bishop means we cannot play bishop takes f6 and knight takes e5, however we can continue with standard Ruy Lopez themes here and play c3. Black can play f5 here, which is called the Cordell Gambit, to which we reply with d4. If e takes d4, we play e5, and we play to either play c takes d4 on the next move or knight takes c3. This position is fantastic for white as we have full central control and have frozen black's pieces. Instead though, black should play f takes e4. The line with d takes c5 is super theoretical and confusing, so I would recommend playing bishop takes c6. If e takes f3, we boomerang with the bishop to capture on f3, but if d takes c6, we play knight takes e5. After bishop d6, we play queen h5 check, g3 and queen e2. If bishop takes e5, we play queen takes e4, and we'll win the piece back on the next move. White is +1 here. But if bishop f5, we play bishop f4, and the game plan is obvious. Win black's weak e4 pawn. In a position like this, the black king side is also exposed, meaning they'll likely castle queenside and give white some really interesting ideas to play for. Instead of playing the Cordell Gambit on move 4 though, black can play more conservatively with knight f6. Here we just castle. This time, if knight takes e4, we play queen e2, with crushing ideas of d3 to come. Black has no way out here. It's important to note, if bishop takes f2 check, we want to play king h1, as the knight is still hanging, so after d4 and d3, one of the pieces will be lost. Instead, black will probably castle, to which we respond with d4, bishop b6, and bishop g5. After d6, we have a4, a5, and h3 stopping bishop g4. After h6, bishop h4, and something like queen e7, we continue with basic Ruy Lopez plans like rook e1, knight d2, knight f1, and knight g3. The Ruy Lopez Old Steinitz Defense. We previously looked at the modern Steinitz Defense, but let's look at where that originated from. After bishop b5, black plays d6 immediately, not realizing the potential intermezzo of a6, which was discovered to be superior later on. An early d6 from black allows an early d4 from white, attempting to crack open the center. d4 also threatens bishop takes c6 and d takes e4, which would eventually win a pawn for white. This means that black's only move here is e takes d4, to which we respond with knight takes d4, applying pressure to the pinned piece. If queen h4 counterattacking, we castle short, knowing rook e1 is available to pin anything that captures our e4 pawn. If knight e7, bishop d7, or queen d7, we simply play knight c3. It might not seem it, but white has a huge advantage in this kind of position no matter what black does. The sole reason is that we have the full center. We're prepared to castle, and all of our pieces are active. Black, however, has no kingside pieces developed, has very little central control, and is looking like they'll be forced to castle queenside. It's important for white to keep up the pressure and not to trade pieces unless it wins material. At the right moment, we'll play e4 and break open the center to terrorize the black king some more. Apart from this though, the old Steinitz doesn't require any more theory. It's just not great for black at all. Ruy Lopez, the Cozio Defense. The Cozio Defense is quite common at the lower levels as the game plan is quite straightforward for black and doesn't allow too many complications. After bishop e5, black will play knight ge7 to defend its knight with another knight. In response, we want to castle short. We'll look at knight d4 later as it's a different variation called the Bird Variation. So for now, let's look at knight g6. In response, we look to break centrally starting with c3. If a6 ever comes, we do not want to drop back to a4 this time, but instead c4 to prevent d5 from arriving for black. If d6, d4 should come, and we're in a very familiar and fluid position for white. Bishop e7 is the correct continuation for black, to which we play bishop e3, and continuing on with rook e1 or knight bd2 ideas. However, one idea that we should cover here is the move f5. We want to play e takes f5, bishop takes f5, and d5 here. This constricts the black position, and on the following turn, we'll drop our bishop back to d3, knowing e4 is not possible because of knight d4. If instead of a6 on move 5 though, black plays bishop e7, we continue with the natural d4, striking centrally once more. If they take our central pawn with e takes d4, they're giving us the entire center and white should be much better. However, if they do anything else, we will take on c6 with our bishop and then proceed to win a pawn on e5. The only move that prevents this is d6, to which we respond with d5, a6, and importantly queen a4, which pins the pawn to the rook behind it whilst also maintaining pressure on the knight. After bishop g4, connecting the rook to its queen, we play bishop e2 to defend the knight whilst maintaining the pin on the black knight. b5 will follow, to which we play queen d1, and wherever the black knight moves, we will play a4 to crack open the a-file. If knight a5, for example, a4, castles, a takes b5, bishop takes f3, bishop takes f3, and a takes b5, we play bishop e2, attacking the loose pawn. If queen b8, we play the silent g3, restricting black's knight from moving anywhere. Eventually, we should play b3 to freeze the black pawns, but from there, white has an absolutely crushing position. With that being said, on move 6 in this variation, it's more likely that black will surrender a pawn to not play with such an awful position. The Ruy Lopez Fianchetto Defense. To be completely transparent, you'll probably never face the Fianchetto Defense. There's just not many reasons to play it, and white has a lot of fun in these positions. Essentially, after bishop b5, black immediately plays g6, to which we respond by castling short. After the standard bishop g7, we play c3, looking to break in the center with d4. To delay d4, black will probably delay us by playing a6 and forcing bishop a4. However, on the following move, regardless of what they play, we're going to play d4. For example, d6, d4. This opening will again follow the principles we've mentioned before. If e takes d4, c takes d4, and white is happy with the big center. If bishop d7, d5, knight ce7, bishop takes d7 check, queen takes d7, c4 should be played, transitioning into a Benoni structure. If bishop g4 instead of bishop d7, we just play bishop e3, and again we follow Ruy Lopez principles of playing rook e1 and rerouting our knight over to g3. If you're familiar with playing against the Benoni with the white pieces, you should manage quite well in these kind of positions, as a lot of the positional characteristics are the same. It's incredibly closed, which keeps a lot of the pieces on the board, which is exciting to play for, and I really do like this position for white. Should the position remain closed, there are no knockout wins, and any advantage will be expertly carved by the superior player. So although white should be slightly better, you certainly need to prove it. The Ruy Lopez Bird Variation. The Bird Variation is an extension of the Cozio Defense, and comes after knight d4, knight takes d4, and e takes d4. It's honestly easier to not explain why bishop a4 is necessary on the following move, but essentially we're saving ourselves from dealing with c6 tempo later on. If black plays g6 to attempt to defend its overextended pawn, we play d3 to open up the dark-squared bishop. After bishop g7, we castle short with plans of going f4 and f5 to undermine the kingside fianchetto. White should be significantly better in these positions where black fianchettos too soon. Knight f3 is a more solid way of playing, but we similarly reply with d3 to defend the pawn. This will be followed by c6 from black, which is interchangeable with knight f6, and could be played in any order, but essentially the threat is d5 from black. This now justifies our bishop a4 move, and we want to play c4 in response to defend against a potential d5. If d takes c3, we play b takes c3, and we're going to have a large center and continue with our basic plans of castling and activating our queenside pieces. However, if black plays bishop e7, ignoring our central advancement, we castle short. After black follows suit, we play knight d2. If d5 ever comes, we play c takes d5, and e5, kicking away the knight. After knight d7, we play f4, and we have much better piece activity than our opponent, not to mention the d4 pawn is a major weakness. For this reason, a6 is more likely, to which we play bishop c2, b5, e5, knight e8, and f4, going for similar plans. It should be quite clear that the answer to a lot of our problems in these positions is just playing f4, so if you don't have a plan, this can be used to fill most of the gaps. Apart from this though, that's most of the bird variation explained, so let's jump into our final variation of the Ruy Lopez. The Ruy Lopez Alapin Defense. The Alapin Defense is the final variation we'll look at in the Ruy Lopez, and is easily the worst for black we've explored, with bishop e4 following bishop e5. This is especially bad because it runs into our plans of c3 anyway, this time with tempo. If black pulls its bishop back to any square along the same diagonal it came from, this will transpose into things we've already looked at. However, black now has bishop a5 to work with. We want to play a4, threatening to trap the bishop with b4 and a5 on the following moves. So in response, black will play a6. We reply by playing bishop takes c6, d takes c6, and knight a3, developing our knight in an obscure way because in this variation there is no bishop to capture it. If black doesn't tread carefully here, white will be much better. For example, if knight f6, we have the simple d3, and the e5 pawn becomes too difficult to protect without obstructing the harmony of the black position. Instead, black should play bishop b6, preventing knight takes e5 with bishop takes f2 tactics. In response, we should castle short. From this kind of position, we have a multitude of new themes. The knight can jump to c4 to harass the bishop, but most importantly, we should play d4 whenever we can to crack open the center and punish the black king for being there. Apart from this though, there's not much else to cover in the Alapin. Not to mention it occurs in less than 1% of Ruy Lopez game, meaning there's a fair chance you'll never actually face it. So now we've looked at most of the potential lines that you'll face in the Ruy Lopez, it's time to give the opening a rating. First, let's start off with effectiveness. I am genuinely blown away at how effective the Ruy Lopez is. There are virtually no bad variations in the opening, barring the Berlin defense, but this would only be a bad variation if you're pushing to become an international master, as there's still so much life in those positions. It's difficult for black to trick white in the Ruy Lopez too. There's not a whole lot of ways for black to complicate anything whatsoever. I would even go as far as to say the advanced refutation for the Ruy Lopez is just to not play e5 as a response to e4. It seems players at the higher level prefer the Sicilian defense to e4 in order to avoid openings like the Ruy. Whilst personally I love those kinds of games, if you're more of a fast-paced player, this opening is certainly for you. In short time controls, I would say my win rate actually improved when I played 1e4 as opposed to 1d4, which I've been playing for over 3 years now. Admittedly, this is because the games are more decisive in the Ruy Lopez and I'm not flagging so often, but it's still worth mentioning. In Rapid, I was able to hold my own against top-rated players too. Of course, I'm not as good at the Ruy Lopez as I am my d4 repertoire, but considering I've only played it for a few weeks, who knows how strong I'd be if I dedicated a few months to it. Overall, the Ruy Lopez is going to score incredibly high here. I'm so unbelievably impressed with the effectiveness of this opening, so I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10. Entertainment value. Honestly, there aren't any boring lines in the Ruy Lopez. There are some that aren't as fun as others, but generally speaking, they're all fun to play. This opening will never score a 10, usually we reserve 10 out of 10 for a flashy gambit that lets us take big risks, but as far as solid, reputable openings go, the Ruy Lopez is right up there. There's plenty of opposite side castling middle games to play, plenty of ways to gambit pawns in the middle game, and overall, it's just an aggressive opening with a lot of attacking potential. The downside is, in every variation, there's one way black can slow the game down and gambit a pawn to try and get into a drawish endgame, but considering white still has great chances in these endgames, and they seem to come up quite rarely, I won't let it affect the rating too much. For entertainment value in the Ruy Lopez, I'll give it a solid 8 out of 10. Theoretical difficulty. I actually didn't think the theory for the Ruy Lopez was incredibly difficult, like some people will lead you to believe. Of course, at an extremely high level, the standard would increase, but there was only 1 or 2 variations which I felt I became lost in, and those variations also had lines where you could bail out into simpler middle games if you weren't confident enough in them. Let's be completely honest though, in comparison to an opening like the London system, the theory is much more dense, but if we compare it to something like the English attack in the Night Elf Sicilian, it's still a little ways off. For theoretical difficulty, I'll give the Ruy Lopez an 8 out of 10. Pretty difficult but manageable, especially if you're a more advanced player. If you're below 1600 ELO though, this might be a bit out of your reach for the time being. With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed today's video. I spent around 24 hours studying the Ruy Lopez and another 10 hours making this video, so if you did enjoy it, feel free to give the video a like. Also, drop a comment below for any openings you'd like to see on this channel. I definitely want to continue this series, so if you have an opening you want to see, let me know. Other than that, I hope you all enjoyed today's video, and I will see you all in the next one.